Hi friends, in this video we're going to be answering a Wikipedia objection about Nero's name equaling up to 666. So let's look at that article real quick in Wikipedia. This is the number of the beast. In one of the paragraphs here, it says, let's just pick up right here, written in Aramaic, this can be valued at, his name written in Aramaic, his number can be valued at 666 using the Hebrew numerology of gematria and was used to secretly speak against the emperor. Additionally, Neron Caesar in the Hebrew alphabet is Neron Caesar, which when interpreted represents the numbers 50, 200, 650, 160, and 200, which adds up to 666. Though this has been disputed by some who note that the second nun is in its final form, the 𝗲𝗏 form, and thereby the value would be 700 instead of 50, which would make Caesar's name add up to 1316 instead of 666. So if that's right, then we don't have a good case, as good of a case for Nero being 666. So that's what we're going to be looking at. Now, they do list, you see the little 29 down there, they do cite the source. So let's jump over there, and it's this book called 1111, The Time Prompt Phenomenon, the meaning behind mysterious signs, sequences, and synchronicities. Okay, so looks like you have to buy this book to read the whole thing. Now it brings us right here to the Hebrew alphabet along with the numbers that correspond with the characters. And you'll see they've got down here at the bottom 700 Nun 𝗲𝗏. Okay, but if we jump back up just a little bit and read this last section, which is Hebrew numbers. Hebrew's numbers correspond with the letter from the Hebrew alphabet, and you'll notice what they have here in this for 500, 600, and 700 is they just add up. Like for 500, you add up the 400 plus the 100 there, put them next to one another, and you get 500. And 600, you'd add, it looks like 400 with 200. So that's different than this little chart down here is showing. And then if you back up just a moment, also when it's talking about the Aztecs, let's look at the last paragraph there. It says, the ancient Romans, Greeks, and Hebrews used alphabetic systems that included the letter of their alphabet corresponding to a number. The 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet represent the numbers 1 to 400. So we've got that to 400, right? With numbers above that represented by composition. For example, the number 500 would be represented by the corresponding letters 400 and 100, and we just looked at that. Okay, so according to even this book itself, it's saying the ancient Hebrews used this system, not this system down here. Okay, so and then we're gonna look a little bit more at this, kind of see if we can figure out which one we should actually be using. So in the current Wikipedia article, this is just kind of restating the argument. On the mark of the beast, the objection is raised that the final Neron has the final Nun form. The final Nun has a value of 700, not 50. This yields a total value of 1316, not 666. So which is it? And by the way, I did buy that book and I searched it up. They don't make any of this article. They don't even, in that book, they didn't even mention the name Nero. So they don't really address that. So all that Wikipedia site was sourcing was just that book that showed that alternate way of using the Hebrew letters to get those higher numbers, 500 through 900. That was the only thing they were extracting from that book. So whoever was making that article or argument in Wikipedia, they don't really cite the source of who's making that argument. So here we are. There's Nun in its closed form being 50, and then the final form being 700. So it's actually not called the closed form, it's called the descender form. Apparently the final form used to be the only form of the letter. The descender form, which has the base, was actually the form that was added later. So let's look at an image here. So here we've got Kaf, there's Lamed, there's Mem, Nun, Sameka, Ain, P, Zaid, and you can see for 5 of those letters there we've got a descender form and a final form. Descender form, final form. So if a word comes after it, if a letter comes after it, it would be this form. If the letter is the last letter of a word, it would be the final form there. Okay. So if the final form preceded the descender form, it doesn't seem likely the final form would have initially been used to represent the larger numbers 500 through 900. This must have been a later development, but was this the practice in the 1st century? So way back in the day when they had these archaic form of Hebrew, the Paleo Hebrew or whatever, they didn't have they only had the final form. Like, let's look at Kaf here. You can see that all these just go straight down pretty much. But then at 8 or 9 there, you started getting, for Kaf, you started getting the final form also there. From the chart below, it looks like the descender and final forms were in use by the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls. This does not mean, however, that the final form immediately took on the 500 through 900 value. That convention may have been developed many centuries later. So in this chart here, 8 and 9 correspond with like the 1st century or 2nd century BC, as this description down here. Look at 8. We've got temple scrolls from Qumran, 2nd century BC. The 9th row there was for the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then these later ones are like from the 10th century AD over here. And this is this kind of script that you'll see in like modern Bibles and stuff. This is what they've been using for a long time. But in the 1st century, they were using like what we see here, 8 and 9, which did have the descender and the final form. But I'm saying, was that final form taking on that large numerical value as that later diagram in the book was showing? So if we could go back into the 1st century and talk to a Jew and be like, hey, what does final noon represent? If he says 50, well, then Nero works. But if he said, oh, final noon, that's, 700, well, then we're up the river, I guess. All right, so to answer it all, I got this from 𝗖𝗲𝗀𝗃 from the Talmud, which was written, let me just read it here. A section from the Talmud, circa 500 AD, 𝗖𝗲𝗃 seems to answer the question. They do gematria on Satan, which has the final N, just like Neron. They assign the final noon a value of 50, and we'll look at the photo. If the Jews this late were still calculating the final noon as, that's a typo, should be 50, it's still, that right there should be 50. It seems reasonable that they were doing this in the 1st century too. So here's just a screenshot from Sefaria.org. And there's the Hebrew and Satan, and I can't read Hebrew, but they've translated it here for us. And it says, the numerological value of the letters that constitute the word Hasatan is 364. He has a value of 5, Sin has a value of 300, Tet has a value of 9, and Nun has a value of 50. So if the Jews that were writing the Talmud 500 years after Christ, and I don't know when this conversation that they're recording here originally took place, but at any rate, whenever they were having this conversation, they were interpreting that final noon as 50. So it's certainly reasonable that Christians in the 1st century would have also interpreted the final noon as 50. And there are many other arguments that help us identify Nero as the beast of Revelation, and a good argument could also be made that Vespasian, also his name adds up to 666, so he would be the 8th, that is of the 7th. That's all I wanted to share with you guys. Anyway, hope that was helpful, and God bless.